music when we do this. Doesn't
Step it
feel
up
right.
now that you're the DJ.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right when people are just coming in quiet. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Great to have you here. And I will start by just chanting a few mantras, and then we'll get right into it. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitang Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jatapara Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, everybody. Welcome back. I have a announcement to make. Unfortunately, by the orders of my wife, I will not be teaching tomorrow because I have a teacher training to do after this today, and then tomorrow I have another teacher training to do, and it starts like at 10 a.m. So it would be going from 8 a.m. until like 12:30 or 1. Like it would be going like 4.5 or 5 hours straight, and I just don't think I can. I don't think my voice can handle it. But I think let's just do today this weekend, and we'll pick up from there in the following weeks. But today's a good day, so there'll be a lot to digest, and hopefully it'll be satisfying to everyone, and everyone can read Bhagavatam on their own or do something tomorrow. Review. Um, um, Again, I appreciate everybody attending so much, and if you would like to leave a donation for these classes, the place to do it would be PayPal. Go to bhakticollective@gmail.com. Thank you so much. And so we're at a real key point here. In one sense, today we'll really wrap up the first class, like the first course, which I call the 4 Paths of Yoga. And then next week, in my mind, it starts to get really exciting too. I'm hoping as this class and then the next classes come, a lot of things may start to just kind of click. Like a lot of things that you might hear about and you can't quite crystallize it or categorize it all in your mind. The things start to snap into place because we're going to have a conversation next week. Will begin, I'm assuming, with this subject of karma, jnana, and bhakti. That there are 3 approaches to seeing the world or to practicing spirituality that can be categorized in these 3. And when you really get the combination of these 3, when you really, and it's a little bit different, it can be a little confusing it doesn't exactly snap in parallel to karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. It's close but not quite, and so we need to discuss that. We need to kind of draw a line and say, okay, now we've discussed this. Now we're going to use some of these same terms in another way. But when you really get the difference between karma, jnana, and bhakti, these 3 different approaches to life. One is where I see the world as meant for my enjoyment. The other is I see the world as a place of suffering and I want to escape it. And then the third is bhakti, wherein one sees it's all God's energy. I'm not meant to enjoy it separately from God or escape from it. I just engage all the energy in the service of God. And that's just, that's just the beginning of it, what I share right there. But when you really get these three clearly, really clearly understood, it informs the way that you see all practices of spirituality. And you can see these three trends in all the different world religions, and you can see them in all the different spiritual practices. And then it gives a lens by which one understands the depth of one's spirituality, not according to one's allegiance to a particular path, but according to how far on that path they progressed. So in any case, that comes next week, but I think that's that stuff will become really powerful. We'll look at those three. We'll see how those three play out in the cosmology as it's described in Srimad Bhagavatam. A very interesting topic. And we'll see how it plays out in the progression of the Vedic literature, the progression of Vyasa's contribution to yogic literature. We'll see that same progression of karma, jnana, bhakti. Real potential, real game changer. But today we're going to complete our 4 paths of yoga with speaking about the path of Bhakti-yoga. And, I guess I'll do a different kind of review right now, but it's different concepts to get really more clear in the mind is what we've gone through. So we identified, let's get a clear idea of a definition of yoga. There's so much talk about yoga. Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Okay, if I got that, that gives me a really great, tool, understanding to approach yoga with. Then let's understand the nature of the self, that we're Satchidananda. And as we start to now we're covering bhakti, and then next week, it's going to take us into those more esoteric places of bhakti. So let me understand that truth about myself, that not only am I eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss, but that bliss, there's an esoteric side to understanding that bliss, that my very nature is love of God, and that can manifest in all different varieties. That's what's meant to be uncovered. And then what's the obstacle to my experiencing that? That's the mind. Well, let's clearly understand. Let's not just throw the word mind out there, but let's clearly understand what the mind is, right? That the mind, it's very much like a computer. It's this facility that I, the user, the soul, contacts the world through, right? That it's through my mind that I bring in information into the world through the senses. It's stored in the mind and processed in my mind, and the impressions set within my mind, the samskaras, they convince me of ideas, that I am this body, that I am this mind, that this will make me happy and that won't make me happy. And that's where all the confusion lies. And it's right there that something needs to be addressed. It's right there where the transformation, the change really needs to take place in order to free me up and allow me to experience my own nature again. So that's what yoga is. But not only am I trapped within this body, with this mind, but I'm also moving through a world that's affecting my mind in so many ways. And I'm trapped and kind of caught up, become a bit of a victim of the law of karma, not fully understanding it and acting in ways which are bringing me suffering. And then there's the element of time, which is moving everything. And as long as I'm attached to anything that is subject to this law, it involves pain. Right? And then the 3 gunas, that all this energy that I'm moving through, it has 3 different influences. And I need to be real careful if I'm going to be able to practice yoga about what influences I'm going to allow in through my senses. Otherwise, I can make the path of yoga much easier or much more difficult according to how I associate with these 3 modes. So that was those conceptions we hopefully got more clear than before. And then we said, so what's the path out? How does one deal with that mind so that they can experience their own true nature again? We have 4 paths of yoga, and we've discussed 3 of them. We've discussed Ashtanga yoga, a path where the strategy And we began this last class, I believe we began, or maybe 2 classes ago, we began just clarifying that all of these 4 paths are yoga. They all have something, they all have something in common that qualifies them as yoga, and that is that they're all practices which empower one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. So they're all yoga. What makes one different from the other? That's the strategy that each one has for overcoming the obstacle of the mind. In Ashtanga Yoga, the strategy is that I'm going to still the mind, hold it on one point, learn to hold it on one point for extended periods of time, learn to hold it on one point for such a long time that I can go into a state of trance called samadhi. And in that state of trance, somehow, subtly, all of that programming in the mind that's confusing me, clouding the clarity of my vision or the clarity of my own, of the experience of my true self, that will become adjusted, somehow corrected in that state. In Jnana Yoga, the strategy was, I have all these material attachments that are in my mind. My mind has become convinced this will make me happy, this won't. Try to get this, try to avoid that. But I can recognize, I can analyze very clearly, coldly, without any sentimentality, that these are not true. But the conviction needs to become stronger and stronger, completely fixed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze each one of those, attachments and dissect it. Right? What was the title that we had for yesterday's class? Dismantled. That we were here to have our egos dismantled. Right? I'm going to dismantle all of these attachments in my mind. But to do that, I can't keep feeding them. So I'm going to go away from my home and from my job and from my relationships and sit quietly on my own and dismantle all of those attachments that I have one by one. And I'll accompany that with some practices of austerity, because that's a way of directly denying the mind. Even if it's tough, I don't care anymore. I'm not going to be controlled by my mind anymore. So there's Ashtanga Yoga is going to still the mind. Jnana Yoga is going to break the attachments to the mind. Both of these paths fall under the larger umbrella of karma sannyasa, where we leave our social roles and our social responsibilities aside. Then we enter into the other umbrella, which we could call karma yoga if we were going to use the Sanskrit term, although that might get a little confusing because there's a subcategory of karma yoga under it. So let's just say in English, the paths where we leave the world behind. And there we had karma yoga and bhakti yoga. We spoke about karma yoga last week. Now the strategy in karma yoga was, I've been moving through this world with the ego that I am the enjoyer, that this world is moving for my enjoyment, that's the purpose of all of this, right? In Jnana Yoga, it's like I need the knowledge that the Jnana Yogi has. I need to be able to understand who I am, what this world is, what God is, understand them all, very clearly. I need to be able to separate truth from illusion and not get caught up in it. But I'm not going to leave the world behind. I'm going to engage with the world. I'm going to engage in my social responsibilities. So the strategy in karma yoga was, I'm going to keep my mind engaged in service, but I'm going to change the attitude or the motivation behind it. I'm going to inform it with knowledge, so that when I work in this world, my karma, my work, will be combined with jnana, with knowledge. So I'll be doing it with detachment. I'll be doing it without thinking that these external things are what's going to make me happy. Rather, I'll be cultivating an attitude that, who am I? What is, on the level of the ego, I'm not the enjoyer of this world. I'm the servant. And so through all my actions, through all my roles, through all the responsibilities that I carry out in terms of my family, in terms of my occupation, in terms of my society, I'm seeing myself as a servant. And I'm contemplating that and working on it day after day after day until it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, more clear. All right, now we get to Bhakti Yoga. What is the strategy of dealing with the mind in Bhakti Yoga? The strategy in Bhakti Yoga is that I want that my soul has its nature. It's Sat Chit Ananda. And as we've spoken about in the past, there are qualities that are therefore natural to the soul: compassion, kindness, generosity, etc. That, and then if we go deeper into it, ultimately the Bhakti yogi's faith is that the nature of that soul is it has love for God, right? That's really the very basis of it all. So the goal in Bhakti yoga is to say, this is my nature inside, in the heart, in the soul, that this is my nature, this devotional, kind, generous, compassionate, loving Atma, soul. But my mind is set in a completely different way. So there's not harmony between the two, there's conflict between the two. Now, I'm not going to try this difficult path where I still the mind and hold it on one point. I'm not even going to try to break all my attachments. The Jnana yogi might believe that I can become free of all attachments. The Bhakti yoga says, no. The very nature of the soul is to attach, is to desire. It just, the desires and the attachments just have to be focused on the right center, right? They just have to be realigned. So I'm not going to try to break every attachment that I have, which has the potential to make me a hardened, cold person. But rather I can realign them. And if I can, just as my mind has been programmed towards illusion through what's come through my senses, if I very consciously curate what I take in through my senses and process that information very intentionally, then I can reharmonize my mind so that my mind becomes in complete harmony with my true nature, with myself. Right? If I listen to the right things, if I see the right things, like that, then my mind can become programmed in such a way where my mind, it still has desires, but they're very different desires. It still has attitudes, very different attitudes and desires that are completely aligned with my true nature. Now there's no longer a conflict between my mind and myself, but now they're working in perfect harmony. And you could say that there's a unity, right? Or a union between the self and the mind. And that union, what's another word for a union? Yoga, right? That's called yoga. When the mind and the soul are in complete harmony, well, then you can move through this world, as a let's say a holistic, you've got your holistic identity kind of like, all together now, right? It's not that the body wants one thing or the mind wants one thing and the soul wants another, and it's conflict and it's getting one trapped in karma and it's creating difficult circumstances and different types of pain and so on. Now they're all just focused on that true nature and working in perfect harmony, working in yoga. That's the goal of Bhakti yoga. So to many people, I think when they hear about Bhakti yoga, it seems like, okay, well, that's not, like, for instance, when we started this class, we said if you stop people on the street and said, what is yoga? Most of them are going to speak about asana. But let's take it to a more exclusive group. Let's say people that when they speak about yoga, they're speaking about the control of the mind and deeper spiritual realization. Well, amongst that group, a lot of people might think, well, Bhakti yoga is like kind of this sentimental kind of religious thing or something like that. It's like, it's not the real thing. It's not the real serious stuff. The real serious stuff is these people that wander off and they go through these mental trainings, or maybe they're doing asana and then they're doing pranayama and they're doing all kind of kriyas. You're familiar with kriyas, different kind of purificatory processes. These are like the real yogis, and they're getting skinny and they're getting intense and they can sit and meditate for long periods of time and do things that, I talk about my friend Yogi Charu. We've brought him on the show before, like he does stuff. Now he's a Bhakti yogi, but he's got within him the samskars of that kind of yogi that I'm talking about. So like he'll do something like sit for 24 hours without budging and count every breath. Right now, that's a mental exercise, right? It's like an intense mental exercise. It's like, think about it. And I don't think any of you want to do that. I don't want to do it. I don't know how long it would be before I'm totally bored and saying, "What? I got to keep doing this for how many more hours? 23 and a half more hours. I got to keep doing this." But some people have those samskars. They're like they're appreciating that experience and what they're getting out of it and the clarity that they're getting out of it and so on. But like some people, that kind of person with those kind of samskars and that, or at least an appreciation for that idea, they might look at the bhakti yogi and say, "Oh, a sentimental person." You'll read about this like when you read, if and when you read a book like the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the biography of Sri Chaitanya. There's just like one scene is where he goes to Benares, modern day, or they call Varanasi. Varanasi is a seat of Jnana Yoga on the bank of the Ganges River in India. People call it the oldest city in the world. It's this very ancient Hindu, center. And when Sri Chaitanya went there, he was a sannyasi. Now the sannyasis were mostly these Jnana yogis. They renounced everything and they're just intensely practicing their meditations, very renounced externally, and very in a sense kind of cold to the material world. I read verses from or some paragraphs from the book Siddhartha when we were discussing Jnana Yoga, but that kind of idea, that kind of, when they walk through the town, they look at everybody, and some people are lovers and some people are working and some people are this and doing that, and they're just looking, it's all a lie, right? It's all just illusion, so they were those kind of sannyasis, and there are hundreds of them. And when they saw Sri Chaitanya, there was this rumor going around that there's this other sannyasi, but he's singing songs, and he's crying when he's singing these songs. And the songs, they sound like they're just like romantic songs, it's like almost the last thing a sannyasi would take any interest in. But at the same time, when they looked at him, he was like effulgent. He had this tremendous, like, unbelievable level of spiritual charisma about him that was undeniable. And so the leader of them all, they were having one big kind of get together, and Sri Chaitanya was sitting just outside, and the leader came out and took him by the hand and said, "Please come join our sangha. I'm looking at you and you're practically like glowing with a spiritual effulgence, but you're singing these songs, and dude, like, you really need to get trained up in the right way to be a sannyasi. We need to talk about Vedanta. We need to talk about Vedanta Sutra." And they started to discuss with all the students, all the other sannyasis surrounding, and then they had this conversation, and very fascinating conversation. But by the time, what Sri Chaitanya did was he kind of broke down their interpretation of Vedanta Sutra and showed them another way to understand it. That's totally devotional, where everything completely clicks with the idea of bhakti yoga. And when they heard it, they became excited. And the leader, the leader of those students of Prakashananda Saraswati, the leader of all of them, got up and said, all along it's like, we've been eating like these dry rice cakes, but the way that you explain it, it's like full of nectar and juice, and now we never understood it like this. Now for the first time we understand a whole nother spiritual alternative. And then they have this huge kirtan, and so like there's this distinction about how this is not just a sentimental thing for old ladies, in a temple, like waving some doing some little puja or something like that, but actually it's the deepest level of spiritual expression, and it's completely consistent with the Upanishads and with the Vedanta Sutra and all of that it comes out in books like that. But let's discuss it. If this is the idea, even if you have an old lady and she's in a temple and she's waving a lamp at a carved deity, is that really yoga, and how is that yoga? That's what we want to discuss now. How does that strategy work? How does the bhakti yogi harmonize the mind with the self? What does that look like? And so what I thought I'd do is I want to discuss some, briefly I'll just say, like, we could look at it, and if we wanted to break it down into some simple categories, we could say that here are some processes. There's hearing the Shastras. There's chanting, meditation on mantras. There's ritual, which plays a big role in bhakti. There's seva itself, performing service. And there's cultural arts, how it all plays out in the cultural arts. So I want to discuss all those. But before I go there, and that's just a breakdown that I just kind of come up with. But I think practically we can see that those are ways that people can practically in this day and age, engage in bhakti yoga. Not that they have. But I wanted to share with you something that I put together at the Bhakti Center. In the past, we did what we call the Bhakti Lifestyle Training, which is kind of like we met together for, I think it was like, it may have been four full weekends where we just went through a lot of different stuff on Bhakti Yoga. And let me share my screen. I put together just in 4 points. This is something I've shared on the show before too, but I'll share it in a little bit more detail. How to understand Bhakti Yoga in just 4 clear points. How it works to transform one's mind so that the self can experience their own true nature. So let's see. Could I get, Mara, could you enable me to share my screen, please? Thank you. Okay. I think this is it. Okay. All right. I'm assuming everyone can see that well. And that's point 3, which we want. Point 1. So here's the in one sense the way that Bhakti Yoga works in 4 points, and I'll read them. And I'm going to just read through this whole document. It's short and simple, but it begins with the conception that happiness through loving service is our true nature. Okay, and we've already discussed that at length and spoke about that in previous Bhakti 101 classes. Okay. 2, false ideas impressed within our minds are the cause of our losing touch with our true nature and seeking happiness externally. And when we were discussing the mind, that's what we were discussing in Bhakti 101. So we've covered that point in depth. Now, point 3 is where we need to go. Point 3 and 4, especially point 3, we're going to examine a lot in depth today. Point 3 is the transformative practices of Bhakti Yoga are designed to purify the mind, or you could say reprogram the computer of the mind, through contact with powerful sources of spiritual energy. All right, so there are sources of spiritual energy that I can bring into my mind, and those will have a dynamic effect on transforming my mind, realigning my mind, harmonizing my mind with my true self. But also, it's not just that, but you need to have, to keep the flow of that energy steady, to make that not just something that one dabbles in and gets their toes wet, but like gets fully soaked in. Then point 4, the steady flow of the transformative energy requires the right conceptions, the right sentiments, and the right lifestyle. And so that's what helps facilitate that practice to become really effective. So let's look at each one of these individually. First point, happiness through loving service is our true nature. The techniques of Bhakti Yoga, the teachings of Bhakti hold that the nature of God is Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge and blissful, and that every living being part and parcel of God, shares those same natural characteristics, just as the rays of the sun share the same qualities as their source, the sun itself, namely heat and light. Similarly, every living being shares the same qualities as their source, which are Satchidananda, eternality, knowledge, and blissfulness. So happiness is not something that we gain through another source. It is something within us, our true nature, that simply needs to be awakened. The practice of Bhakti Yoga is the direct method, and direct becomes important. We may not get to that today, but keep this, just make a little note in your head. When I say it's the direct method, I mean the 3 other paths of yoga are indirect, and the path of Bhakti Yoga is direct. And just hold on to that thought, and I don't think we'll explain that today, but in future classes we'll explain that. So the practice of Bhakti Yoga is the direct method for awakening the true nature of the soul. And then I quoted a verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, It says, pure love for Krishna is eternally established in the hearts of all living entities. It is not something to be gained from another source. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila. I didn't write the chapter. Probably 19. Text 107. All right. And then, so that's point one. Again, very simple. That happiness through loving service is our true nature. Okay. But what's the problem? Point number two. False ideas impressed within our minds, samskaras, right? False samskaras, are the cause of our losing touch with our true nature and seeking happiness externally. Okay? So every image, sound, etc., that enters through our senses is transferred to the mind and leaves an impression or a samskara. These impressions program the mind just like downloaded information on a computer. They take the form of convictions of what will make us happy and what will not, as well as false ideas of who we are. I shared a couple quotes from Srila Prabhupada here. I thought they were interesting, and I'll just read them now. One of them, he says, the mind is always concocting objects for happiness. I am always thinking, this will make me happy, or that will make me happy. Happiness is here. Happiness is there. In this way, the mind is taking us anywhere and everywhere. And then this one I found very interesting. Prabhupada says, by material association and education, we learn simply to concentrate on flimsy things. But yoga is the process of forgetting them altogether. Modern so-called yogis and yoga systems manifest some magical feats, and ignorant persons are attracted by such false things, or they accept the yoga system as a cheap healing process for diseases of the gross body. But factually, the yoga system is the process of learning to forget what we have acquired throughout the struggle for existence. Okay, so we have a mind that's got impressions in it that are convincing us that this will make me happy and that won't make me happy, and as well as false ideas of who we are. And that's why we're not experiencing that true nature. Okay, now, point number 3. The transformative practices of Bhakti-yoga are designed to purify the mind through contact with powerful sources of spiritual energy. The practices of Bhakti-yoga bring our mind into contact with powerful sources of spiritual energy, the energy which is of the same nature as both God and the soul. So in other words, well, I'll continue. 5 practices have been identified by leading teachers of Bhakti as particularly powerful. So if you read, for instance, the book The Nectar Devotion, which is a type of summary of Rupa Goswami's book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he identifies 5 potent, particularly potent practices of Bhakti Yoga. 1 is chanting the holy names of God. 2 is reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. 3 is residing in a holy place. 4 is worshiping the form of God. And 5 is associating with other Bhakti yogis, associating with devotees. When the mind becomes purified or reprogrammed through contact with these sources of spiritual energy, then it is no longer in conflict with the soul, and the true nature of the soul reawakens. Okay. And I quoted another verse from that same chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, etc. And here when we say heart, we can just understand mind, right? Same thing, that part of the mind where the dearest things are held. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, etc., the living entity naturally awakens. Right? So you can see here I had a kind of like some kind of, I don't know, radio tower, kind of radiating its signal. And so the idea being here is that each one of these is radiating a signal, but it's a spiritual signal. It's a signal of energy that is not of this world, but it's Purusha, it's spiritual, it's not Prakriti, it's not material energy. I was the other day, Raghunath and I were discussing this verse, or from a song actually, Golokera Premadana Harinama Sankirtana. That Golokera, from the spiritual realm, from the highest point in the spiritual realm, Golokera, Goloka Vrindavan, Golokera Premadana, it gives prem, Harinama Sankirtana, comes this Harinam Sankirtan, comes this practice of chanting congregationally with music, chanting God's names. It's coming from the spiritual realm. And prema dana, it gives prem. But we just read that prem is actually something that's already within us, so it's not exactly giving it, but it's uncovering it, right? So when the nature of the soul, when we bring into the mind and flood that mind and bathe that mind with that spiritual energy, then it ceases to be in conflict with the self, and naturally the nature of the self then easily, automatically arises. That's the practice of Bhakti Yoga. I just want to check because I see the chat has 6 things here. Are there any questions, Mary, that I should be taking?
Yeah, I just got a question. We learned that the mind belongs to the subtle body, and so to the material world, the unsteady, always changing energy of God. When one goes back to the spiritual world, what happens to the mind? Will one have a sort of spiritual mind in the spiritual world?
Yes. In other words, it's not that the mind, our current mind, is very subtle material energy. So just like, although it's subtle, it's material energy. So just like anything else that's made of material energy, it comes together and it dissolves. It comes together and it dissolves. Just like this microphone, in front of me right now. It seems kind of solid. It's like it's made out of metal. But at a certain point, it's all going to dissolve, whether it rusts away, buried in the ground somewhere, or someone melts it and forms it into another shape. The form it's in right now will change. It'll separate. It'll enter into new shapes. And similarly, the mind it's also made of material energy. So the material mind will disintegrate. And even like sometimes in Bhagavatam we read, like when, what was it yesterday? We were talking, or no, a couple days back when we were talking about Lord Shiva, and we talked about how Shiva's wife Sati became so disgusted with her materialistic father, who had no love for Lord Shiva, that she was just like, I am sick of you, and if my body comes from you, then I don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. And so she had this yogic ability to, and of course people are going to look at it as mythology, although there are many, too bad we don't have Rogo here right now, he'd get all excited, right? But there are many examples of what they call, this phenomenon, spontaneous human combustion, where people's bodies, they light up, because there's heat in that body. And so somehow she had the yogic ability to manipulate that heat in the body and then light up. But we'll read different descriptions of yogis who step by step disintegrate each element of the body and then free themselves like that. So the material mind, but understand that the material mind is not, this is the point. I think this point gets to the essence of the question. Who's asked the question, Mary?
It's from Nicole.
From Nicole, okay. So I believe that the essence of your question goes to this point, and it connects with something else we were discussing recently about how the brain, what context were we discussing that in? Oh, yeah, that was from that Stephen Taylor. I did it again. Stephen Taylor.
Dream on!
So this psychologist was speaking about how, if we think about it, there seems to be a lot of reason to believe that the brain does not generate consciousness, but that the brain is just kind of a receiver of the conscious signal, as the radio is a receiver of a radio signal. It's not that the radio creates music. The radio is picking up a signal coming from somewhere else, right? And just amplifying that. So in a similar way, the mind, the brain itself, and even the mind, is not consciousness itself, or the soul, but the soul is just using that mind the same way that someone uses a computer, or in a similar way that someone uses a radio for that matter. So so the self, it has the ability to process information and to think. It has, in a sense, this the function of the mind exists there, um, on this in the spiritual realm or within the spiritual body. Um, but it's not prone to the weaknesses of the um, material mind. So yeah, we can think, and we read that the way Prabhupada translated it earlier in this course. We read this description. We just read a description just a few minutes ago that described the nature of the self, and it said that prema, pure love of God, is situated in the heart of every living entity. That's going deeper and more esoteric than just saying like happiness, right? But we read earlier in this course, we read from the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where it talks about the uncovering that nature of the self through the practice of yoga. And it mentioned that when one experiences that level of happiness, they experience it through transcendental senses, right? Because so even if my eyes were to disintegrate, my entire material body, it doesn't mean that I can't see. It doesn't mean that I can't hear. These ears and these eyes and etc. They're just like an external kind of thing. Just because I don't have a computer screen doesn't mean I don't see anymore. It's just like one thing that I'm looking through, I'm kind of look through a television to see a scene somewhere else, but I don't need a television to see. It's just one thing that I'm seeing through at the moment. And so similarly, the material mind is just one facility that the soul is using at the moment, feeling that it's depending on, identifying with it. But ultimately, it doesn't need it. All that we can do through the mind or through the body can be done much better by the soul without these. These are actually limiting faculties. They limit us more than they facilitate. Okay, I hope that was helpful, Nicole. Anything else for now, Mary?
No, that's all for now.
Okay. All right. Great. So I see people are asking if they can get that document. I can share that too. We could share that on Patreon, or people can write in for it if they want. Okay. So next point. Where were we? Oh, so let's go through these 5 different potent forms of bhakti. Right. It's called Panchanga Bhakti, 5 limbs of bhakti. It's one, it's one analysis that we find there. And so let's start with hearing, okay? Because that is where it's, in one sense, that's ultimately where it starts. Or both these paths, Shravanam and Kirtanam. Hearing, here it's, it was mentioned hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. It extends beyond Bhagavatam, but Bhagavatam is the basis for it. So hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. And the second one is chanting the holy names of God, Shravanam and Kirtanam. Really, these are the crucial, fundamental practices of Bhakti-yoga. And I mentioned, people, when they hear Bhakti-yoga, they may have different impressions of it. I think when people hear about it in the modern Western yoga world, there's not a lot of depth there generally. And they might kind of see it as just a very sentimental kind of kumbaya, I don't know, just kind of a feel-good kind of, thing. It's about, singing spiritual songs, and it's nice. But they don't realize the depth of it. They don't realize the seriousness of it. They don't realize that the same levels of renunciation are there, maybe not externally, but internally. They don't realize the richness of the tradition, the depth of the philosophy, etc. So if someone is a serious bhakti yogi, and someone say, I'm a bhakti yogi, or I'm into bhakti, if someone's really practicing it, like, in other words, with the seriousness of a true practitioner, not just dabbling in it, well, then these two, hearing and chanting, will become a very important daily function for them, right? These two will become, the essential part of their practice, hearing and chanting. So let's talk about hearing first. Um, it says hearing Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, and when we hear these texts, hearing here means it can mean reading, it can mean hearing from a speaker, and also, within that is the idea that one can question and receive answers to their questions. So all of this, you could put under that Shravanam. And so, and this is something that we talk about. Raghunath always goes on about, almost on a daily basis. But by hearing this information on a daily basis, one begins. All of these spiritual ideas begin to sink in and take root. Now, for instance, if you look at this, is how yoga works. This is how practice works. Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, he describes that it's through practice and detachment that one can overcome the mind. And then he defines what practice is. And he says that when something is done with the right devotion or dedication, the right attitude, over a long period of time and without interruption, right? And by without interruption, we can understand that meaning like daily, regular, right? When something is done with the right dedication over a long period of time and very regularly, then it becomes firmly rooted, right? Deeply, firmly rooted. That's how practice works. So when one hears Bhagavatam, and within that, there's a lot. And there's a lot on the level of jnana, like understanding who I am, what this world is, what God is. That's information, knowledge. But there's also a lot in terms of spiritual sentiment, developing that love, uncovering that love, redirecting redirecting our affections. That by doing this, not just occasionally, not just weekly, but really daily, that this hearing becomes firmly rooted and it transforms one's life. And so I know we hear so many times from Wisdom of the Sages listeners that, the opportunity to hear this every day is changing everything, and it changes my day, right? Because the strength of the material energy, is that as soon as we put the book down and then we walk off into the world, immediately, whether it's association with people in my family, responsibilities that I have, stepping outside the door and the onslaught of all that means, or turning on the computer and looking at and all the images and sounds that come from that, being involved in my occupation in the world and dealing with relationships and all these things, the tendencies are going to make us forget it all, right? And very quickly we're back into the body and back into the mind and locked into what I think is going to make me happy, and feeling conflict and not being able to see things with wisdom and all of that. But if we hear it every day, day by day by day by day by day, it comes deeper, 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 until that knowledge becomes more firmly rooted. And then eventually, through deeper and deeper cultivation of this, it goes from the platform of jnana to like, I understand this, to vijnana, that I have completely imbibed it, so I live through it, realized knowledge. So the process of hearing does that, but beyond that, on a more esoteric level, it is through the process of hearing that we actually develop love for God, right? Because in other words, we have to know God, and we have to hear these pastimes of God. Bhagavatam gives the life of Krishna in it. The Bhagavatam is 16,000 verses in 12 cantos, but the 10th canto is 1/4 of the entire thing, right? And the 10th canto is Krishna's life. So much of the Bhagavatam is to help us fall in love with Krishna. But in order for that to happen, we have to hear the descriptions. We have to meditate on them. We have to bring the mind to that. And we have to bring the mind to that on a regular basis. And so when we say hearing, it means it has its informational side to it. I need to understand this world. I need to understand who I am in relation to this world. But it also has the esoteric side to it. I need to understand God and who God is and become attracted. Become attracted. So we read for information, but we also read to change the heart. And we read just as a practice of purification, even if nothing more than to take my mind from the material vibration and for as long as I'm reading, turn the channel of the radio, retune the radio onto the spiritual energy, right? And just hear, just for this next half hour, my mind is just going to be absorbed in the spiritual energy, even if I don't walk away remembering all 5 points that were made. But I just kept it engaged in that energy. It's bathing in it, soaking it in it, right? When we hear Bhagavatam, we're soaking the mind in, you know, a a pool of spiritual energy. And so, just like a lot of things, some things are more porous than others. If you throw a sponge in, it immediately becomes soggy. But if you throw, a cue ball in, it's like it's hardly penetrating. It's going to take years and years and years of sitting in there before the water makes that outer shell soggy and starts to get through it. So our mind is something, somewhere in between. It's like where we need to hear this message daily, daily, daily. And if we can absorb it in that, then gradually it becomes softer. But, the nature of it is, and same principle applies when we get to the next subject, is chanting. In the beginning we chant that name, and we don't feel anything necessarily. But if we keep chanting, keep chanting, keep chanting, keep chanting, eventually we begin to get a taste for it, and that taste will grow and increase. Again, Rupa Goswami shares this analogy of when describing this practice, particularly in relation to the holy name, but it could relate to Shravanam as well. That he gives the example of a patient with jaundice, right, which is this it's a ailment of the liver, and when one gets it, their whole bodies, their eyes and their skin and everything starts to become like yellowish. And I've never had it, but apparently it's not nice. And the cure for it somehow, they say one of the symptoms of it is that when you eat particularly sweet things, they taste very bitter. And when you eat sweet things and they taste bitter, you've got jaundice. That's part of the symptom. But the cure is actually this rock candy, like this crystallized sugar. And you eat that sugar, but when you eat it at first, it tastes very bitter. But as you start to get healthier, it starts to taste less bitter. And then when your health is fully restored, you taste the full sweetness of it, So similarly, the holy name, or even hearing Bhagavatam, in the beginning for people, it may not be totally sweet, but the more that you stay absorbed in it, the healthier you become. And gradually its full effect comes. But anyway, going back to Shravanam, we see that this is the path, throughout the Vedic literature, throughout Upanishads, throughout the Puranas, and especially throughout Bhagavatam. This is the path where one is sitting and hearing. And that hearing is a very powerful, transformative energy. Vaisheshika Prabhu, who we brought on the show before, and we got to bring him back. He once came to the Bhakti Center, and he's, I was kind of lining up the program, and I said, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, well, I could do this one where I say, I have 3 ways to immediately dramatically affect your, I forget how he titled it. It was one of these titles, like 3 things that will immediately, dramatically affect your spiritual practice or your consciousness or something like that. And, when you hear things like that, I said, okay, there's these gimmicky things, and, they say, but he said one of them was just read Bhagavad Gita every day. Right. And it's a fact. It's just a fact. If you actually do that, right off the bat, you in a very dynamic way, you change your life. Right. If you just do that, even if it's just for that time that you're reading, what to speak of, but if you read Bhagavad Gita every day, it is going to change your life. If you read it, particularly if you read it with faith, So by hearing these texts, hearing them with faith, hearing them from people that have realization on it, it is a very powerful, transformative power that helps realign the mind with the nature of the self. You just got to keep feeding that spiritual energy, that spiritual knowledge, that transcendental knowledge. Keep feeding, keep bathing the mind in that, keep marinating the mind in that. Even if some of the points you can't quite put them together, and even if sometimes it's a little tedious, and even if sometimes you're not sure why we're hearing this, and even if sometimes you get a little bored, you keep doing it, it becomes sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, And then you begin to realize, oh my God, this is answering everything. And every time I need an answer, it's got it right there. And but it's marinating that mind in that spiritual energy. It's the mind has been so deeply absorbed in material thought and material subject matter for so long that this stuff feels foreign. But the more that you marinate in it, it starts to feel natural, and everything else starts to feel foreign. And that's a really powerful. And then you're getting deeper into your spiritual life. Okay, so Shravanam is the first one, and then the second one listed was chanting the holy names or kirtanam. And of course, this is done in two, particularly in two ways. One of them is chanting japa, where one has a row of 108 or a mala, like a rosary of 108 beads, and one chants one mantra on each bead. And generally, commonly this type of practice is done with vows. I will chant this many times. And the other way is kirtan. Let's talk about japa first. The idea being that I have these beads, and as I go from one bead to the next, each time I make an effort to focus the mind on that mantra. I remember, I may have mentioned this when we had Eddie Stern on the show, who was my Ashtanga yoga teacher and my asana teacher. And he mentioned to me that vinyasa yoga, wherein in between what they call the heart of the asana is actually what we would call the yoga pose, right? That we, whatever that, halasana or, virabhadrasana or whatever that pose is, they would call the heart of the asana. And then the vinyasa is the series of movements and breaths that one goes through in between the tying one asana to the next. So almost like an Asurya Namaskar, where you might rise up and then bend over and then jump out, and then you go through each one, and then you come into the heart of the asana, and then you go back out the same way, and then you go back into the next asana. You go into the heart of the asana, 5 breaths, and then you go out of that asana. So it's like each asana is like a bead, and the vinyasa movements and breaths in between are like the string that's tying them together. Or you could also say that the one string that's going through them all is the breath, right? It's like all of those different hearts of all those different asanas are strung on that string of the breath. The breath stays steady throughout the entire thing, and each asana is like a bead on that string. And so he said to me that vinyasa yoga is very conducive for japa practice, because what happens is that when one goes through the movements of the vinyasa, it's almost like, I think of it like this. Imagine that you were chanting Krishna's name, and you had a chalkboard with you. And as you said Krishna, you wrote Krishna on the chalkboard. And then you erased the chalkboard, took a breath, and then wrote Krishna again. And then you erased the chalkboard, took a breath, and then wrote Krishna again. Each time you are concentrating the mind on that name, and then you're wiping it away, and then and now it's a whole new effort to again focus the mind on that name, and then you erase it again, and then you do it again. So what you're doing is, I don't want to use a word that's too cold or something like that, but in a sense it's drilling the mind. Drilling means just like you go into the military and you get drilled, right? Or you're learning violin and they put you through, lessons that are in a sense drills, where you do something again and again and again and again and again. And the more that you do it, the more you become accustomed to it. And the more that you become accustomed to it, the better you do it. So in a sense, japa is like that, right? Where just as, imagine if when you were writing on that chalkboard, you weren't only writing that name on the chalkboard, but you were writing it as beautifully and perfectly as you possibly could. So you just wrote it in the most beautiful handwriting that you could muster, Krishna. And then you erased it, took a breath, and then again wrote Krishna. And each time you're doing it, you would do it with affection, right? Do it with some real feeling. You write it again, then you erase it again, then you write it again, right? Now I see Tamara's saying, would some people call that brainwashed? Prabhupada did actually, because, he would say, yeah, they say we're brainwashed. That's exactly what we're doing, yes. You got this mind, and it's become polluted, with all your television, with all your movies, and with all your crazy relationships, and with all your false ideas of what's going to make you happy in this world. And yeah, that's right. Give us the brain, we're going to wash it. Sometimes he would say like that. But the fact is one's just choosing their brainwashing in one sense, rather than allow my mind to be overcome, rather than give up my power. Like when people use like that idea of brainwashing, generally they're saying you've given up your power to this other person that's brainwashing you. And now you become like a zombie and a follower of some cult or something like that. But the way that I look at it is, no. I am going to, rather than just be ruled by my mind and senses, which other people through their television, through the movies, they've been showing me so much garbage that I'm lost in this world and I've become a slave to my mind and senses. Instead, I'm going to take control. So it's not a position of weakness, but it's a position of strength. The yogi is actually the strong one. The yogi is saying, you know what? I'm going to take control. This computer that I have has got all kind of viruses in it. I'm going to reprogram it intentionally, right? I am not this mind, but I'm the person that's going to fix this mind so that it works properly, right? And you'll see, I won't be some mindless person that has no self-esteem or whatever. No, I got self-esteem. I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I feel good about it. So, back to the chalkboard, you were writing very clearly Krishna one time. Then again, with focus and concentration, and ultimately, ideally, with affection, with feeling. So that's what japa is, right? With each bead, right? You chant on one bead. You don't necessarily take a breath and everything, or it might take a very long time, but one can also chant like that if one has the time, But the idea is that with one bead, it's almost like you place that mantra on the bead with your mind, like Krishna, Hare Krishna, one clear mantra, then move on to the next. Patabi Joyce's book on Ashtanga Yoga was called Yoga Mala, right? So it was like a mala, again, that all of the asanas are strung on the string of the breath. And actually, my friend Eddie, when he once asked Patabi Joyce, he said, how do you know when you're doing the asana correctly? And of all the teachings from Patabi Joyce, this is maybe the one that I appreciate the most. He said, when the mind is silent, then the asana is correct. And the way that I understand that, and the way that I practiced that, was that when I would do Ashtanga Yoga, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I would, in my mind, when I would go into those 5 breaths, I would chant, rather than count them, I would chant mantras. And the advantage of chanting mantras while doing the asana was that if the breath, ideally the breath would be even, the inhalation and the exhalation would be at the same rate. And one can time the rate of one's breath through the mantra. So like if I go, Om Gyana Timarandasya, inhale. Gyananjana Shalakaya, exhale. Chakshra Unmilitam Yena, inhale. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, exhale. So I could take, if I chanted that one mantra slowly, clearly, each line being either an inhalation or an exhalation, well then with each mantra it would be 2 breaths, right? So with 2 mantras it would be 4 breaths. With 3 mantras it would be 6 breaths. And I could count and, regulate that. But in my mind, I could go through a whole series of Bhagavad Gita verses, or I could go through a whole, like the verses I chanted earlier today, I could go through all of them. And then then go through the vinyasa, come back into the next asana, and again meditate on these verses. But here's the point. When you're doing an asana that you're comfortable in, it's easier to chant the mantra. When you're doing an asana that you're uncomfortable in, and it said, again, the Yoga Sutras say that, that the asana should be sukham and stiram. It should be fixed, and it should be sukham, it should be happy or comfortable with ease. And so when you're doing an asana and you're doing it correctly, you're in ease. And when you chant that mantra in your mind, it should just clearly ring like a bell, right? But if you're uncomfortable, like, when you're in an asana that's difficult and your breath is disturbed, right? When it's hard and difficult and generally your breath is disturbed, and it's through breathing that one can gradually ease into it and learn that asana correctly. And the mind may be suffering when you're doing an asana that's difficult to do. It's full of anxiety or full of some sort of stress. But when you do it well, when you do it right, then the mind is just at ease. Like sometimes we see someone that's doing a difficult yoga posture, but their face is just like, completely at ease, and they're doing it right. So like that with each. So when I would practice that asana, I could feel when I was in that asana well, and I had the ability to do it well, that when I would chant that mantra, it would just be like, bang, just like clear and pure and radiating throughout my mind. So similarly, when we chant japa, the idea is similar, that I could chant one mantra on one beat and let it ring throughout my mind, and then on to the next beat, and then again, it's like when I go to the next beat, it's like I've erased it, and then I'm doing it again, and bang, and then chant that next mantra. And in this way, 108 times around that mala, I will have 108 times, ideally, I will have 108 times concentrated my mind on that mantra. And then if I do that 16 rounds a day, then I've done that 16 times 108. And if I do that every day, then it's that many times, in that many ways, with that many efforts, I've absorbed the mind in that name, right? With that many efforts. And just like it with asana, the more that one does it, the more that one gradually eases into it. And what was difficult in the past becomes easier. And in this way, I've guaranteed that if I follow that vow, that I'm consciously, with great effort, becoming more masterful in absorbing my mind in that name, and the mind is becoming transformed by that effort. Just like, if I had a, say you got some guy and they have these movies where like a guy's in jail, and every day he's putting a new, mark on the wall, like how many days I've been here. And he's scratching away, maybe he's just got like a spoon or something like that, but he's making a hole in the wall, and like every day he can only do so much. He's just like, he's just scrubbing away a little bit, but a little bit more is opening up, and then he puts his bed in front of it and hides it, nobody sees it, but he's digging a hole, and the hole's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so similarly, our job is like that, we're scratching away at it, but sooner or later it starts to open up. And then one day he can go through that hole, so it's something like that. I saw we had a hand up. Mara, do you know who that was?
Arvind had his hand up for a minute, but then he put
Arvind.
it back down.
Okay. Well, Arvind, if you have a question, just let me know. Anything else for now? We good?
Yeah, Chapuji had asked, does each lineage have different texts for practicing Shravanam?
Well, when we say each lineage, let's say the Vaishnava lineages, if you mean like the Bhakti-yoga Vaishnava lineages, the four Vaishnava sampradayas, the books are the same, but different. From what I understand, and I'm no super pro with it, but like for instance, from what I've heard, the Sri Sampradaya, which is also called the Ramanuja Sampradaya, that they put more emphasis on the Padma Purana than they do on the Bhagavatam. In general, their focus is more on worshiping Lord Vishnu with a mood of reverence than it is on, like in our sampradaya, and worshiping Krishna in a mood of intimate love. And so that book more facilitates that. But certainly they accept Bhagavad Purana, and certainly we accept Padma Purana as truth. But they may have a different focus. I know that in the Vallabha Sampradaya, it's Bhagavatam, like that. And what was the other thing I was going to mention? And then, of course, when it comes down to, like, say, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which I was quoting before, that's only within our lineage. That's a book that's like, others may respect it, but that, like, that's in our lineage, that's particularly special. So yeah, they'll have different books and different influences, but it all goes back to Gita and Bhagavatam and so on. So there's a connection, but there may be a particular focus that they might have that might be different.
Danny Kalikowski asks, is the bead bag used to protect the purified energy of our mala?
People say different things. I'll be honest. We don't want to let them drop on the ground, and we don't. We want to respect them. Just like, if you, and that's something where I mentioned earlier. We're saying that, I'm saying right now that if that the holy name, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, let's say the holy name, that it's a powerful source of spiritual energy. It's like that it's radiating energy. And what we're trying to do is become receivers of that energy. But I heard the name and my life didn't change. So you're telling me that not only is that name powerful, there are verses that I could quote. Like, what's the famous one? I wish I would have come prepared for this. If I just had the first word, if someone could just give me the first word, I'd be able to do it. But there's a famous verse that's quoted that says, the holy name is absolutely non-different from Krishna himself. Like, Krishna's name is Krishna. And that's something that the material mind can't wrap its head around. But that when this name is heard, actually you're directly associating with Krishna. So now, if that's the case, we're not just saying that it's a powerful source of spiritual energy. It's not just powerful. It is the all-powerful Krishna in the form of this sound. That means it's so powerful that, well, what's the question of my material mind not being influenced by it? You understand? But the point is that our problem is that we're not focused on it. Like, the sun is very powerful, but if I'm sitting in a dark closet, I'm not feeling its effect. I need to go outside. But if I just go outside and come right back in, I'm not feeling it. If I go outside but I'm like fully clothed, I'm not going to become suntanned. But if I go out there and expose myself to the sun's rays, and I do it for, and I allow myself to become absorbed in it, well, then I'm going to get a suntan. And so I need to find a way to become absorbed in this name. But along with that, to get that energy flowing, part of what it means to get out there and so on is it means to, like, if I go out there, but like I say, I leave, all my clothes on and I'm all covered up and everything like that. No, I need to go out there and I need to expose myself to it. And part of what that means to expose it is, in this analogy, is that we need to have the right knowledge and the right sentiments and the right lifestyle. And so the right sentiments, it's really important, because like the whole idea is I'm trying to readjust my mind and readjust so that I honor that which is deeply spiritual. And the more that I'm coming in that mood, like I honor this name, well, then the more that it's going to deeply affect me. I remember once I used to cook at the Broome Street Temple, and it was a difficult circumstance because I was in this tiny closet, and it had a window to the street, thankfully, but it was like there was no room. It was a very small closet, and I had 2 electric burners, and I'd have to commonly cook for like 30 people, but sometimes up to like 80 people in that little, and there wasn't a sink there. There was a sink like in another room. And I would whip up these meals, and I didn't always know how many people were coming. And one day, the last thing you want to do is waste any of it. But sometimes it's like it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're about to go home, and there's nothing, and you're going to have to throw something out, pour something down the sink, something left over, something like that. And someone said to me, you can just pour it down the toilet because it's all just going to the same place anyway. And the point that I didn't make this point, but what became really clear in my mind is like, it may be, but what does it do to my heart and to my mind when I take something so sacred to me and treat it that way? So we don't do that, and so much of like the etiquette in Bhakti yoga has to do like when one does the prikrama around Vrindavan, the pilgrimage, you take off your shoes, because I'm not going to step on this with my shoes on. I'm going to, it's how we set our sentiments, how, the etiquette when I bow down to someone, they can tell me the same exact information, but I bow down to them to cultivate the right attitude, the right sentiment, so that when I hear it, it penetrates and stays. I'm not callous. I'm sensitive, So I think as far as why the beads are in that bead bag, the way that I understand it is these beads are sacred to me. They're not going to lie on the ground. They're not going to, I'm going to keep them nicely. And that's how I understand it. There may be other reasons, so on, but that's how I understand it. Especially it has to do with our sentiments.
Richman Cuso asked, is it okay not to use a mala and just use your fingers to keep count?
Yeah, I mean, I do that sometimes too. There's a way to divide up, there's like, you have 4 fingers and then each one of them has 3 different segments. And then if you multiply, so that's 12, and if you multiply that by 9, then you get 108. And so then there's ways to count, in patterns that people, there's a way that you start here and you go down and then you go around and come back up and you do all 12. So yeah, one can for sure, but I do it only when I have to, when I'm without my beads or something like that. But I think generally people find that the beads is an easier way. You're not losing count, and there's something about that tactile. Again, it's really has to do with sentiment and, well, not only sentiment, but ability to focus, ability to focus. So people do chant like that. And when I chant Gayatri, it's a counting method that I do when I chant Gayatri. When people chant Gayatri mantra, we're also chanting a certain number of times, and you can count. Generally, people do count by counting them on those segments of the fingers. So it's okay. But if you ask me, when is my concentration better? If you were to say, Kaustubha, we need you to chant like the most focused round of japa that you ever chanted, I'm going to go for the beads, before I go for my hands. A little bit easier. Okay. Anything else for now?
No, but Jeffrey Ackler gave the verse that you were looking for from Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can get it. 1 second before I look.
You want the first word?
Yeah, give me the first word.
Deha, dehira.
No, that's not the one I was thinking of.
Oh, no?
No. What's that one?
There's no difference between Krishna's body and himself, or between his name and himself.
That's a nice verse. Very good. Now, the one I was thinking was, okay. Well, the word Chintamani is in the first line, so it's Nama Chintamani Krishnas, Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Binavam Nama Namino is the last word. Shuddho Nitya Mukto. I'm almost got it, Yeah. Nama Chintamani Krishnas, Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Shuddho Nitya Purna Mukto Binavam Nama Namino. I'm almost got. Oh, there we go. Chapu, thank you. Nama Chintamani Krishnas, Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha, Purna Sudho. So Nama Chintamani Krishna. The name of Krishna, Nama Krishna, is Chintamani. It's a wish-fulfilling gem. Okay. Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. It's the form of a Chaitanya Rasa. It's the form of rasa, means that the sweetest nectarian, even panacea, of Chaitanya for life itself. Purna Shuddho, it's completely pure. Nitya Mukto, it's always liberated. It's never influenced by the material energy. And then Binatvam Nama Namino, the one that is named, the name itself is not different from the one that is named. Right? Binatvam Nama Namino. There's no separation between the two. The holy name of Krishna is transcendently blissful. It bestows all spiritual benedictions, for it is Krishna himself, the reservoir of all pleasure. Krishna's name is complete, and it is the form of all transcendental mellows. It is not a material name under any condition, and it is no less powerful than Krishna himself. Since Krishna's name is not contaminated by the material qualities, there's no question of its being involved with Maya. Krishna's name is always liberated and spiritual. It is never conditioned by the laws of material nature. This is because the name of Krishna and Krishna himself are identical. Okay, so yeah, it's verses like that, So therefore, the bead bag and all that is just so that I remain in that consciousness that my beads are my access to that name. When I chant that name, it's it's learning. I tell you, when you meet people that are advanced bhakti yogis, the difference, one thing that's clearly manifested in their lifestyle, in the way that they live, in the way that they behave, is that, and the difference between a devotee that's advanced and not so advanced, you can see, is that the ones that are not so advanced, they're a bit like clumsy elephants moving around and bumping into things and messing things up in a sense. Whereas the advanced devotee is like a swan. They move with grace. But what I mean by that is not necessarily like their physical movements. But what I mean by that is the way that they treasure certain things. It means it's when you realize how precious something is, then you associate with it with reverence, with care, in a way that's gentle, in a way that's very conscious. And when you don't realize how valuable something is, you may relate with it carelessly, maybe awkwardly. If someone, a lot of times comedy is based on something like that. Like somebody's got something that's very precious, they don't realize it, and somebody else has realized it. Like be careful. What are you talking about? So other devotees, the way that an advanced devotee appreciates them is so much more than the way someone who's not advanced appreciates them, or doesn't, or fails to fully appreciate. And so the level of the first one's appreciation, it's coming out in how they greet them and how they speak with them, in the grace in which they deal with that person, how quickly they're ready to change everything to facilitate that person, and so on. Whereas another person may just be like, "Hey, what's up, guy?" It's like they don't fully understand it. A lot of times that's what happens when you bring someone that's not familiar with the practice or the culture into the realm, and you see like they still don't get it. They don't get how special this person is, or how special this mantra is, or how special this kirtan is, or how special this temple is. They don't see how precious it is. But then when one starts to understand how precious it is, then it starts to reflect in all the behavior, and the etiquette is built around. The etiquette is there to help identify this is precious. Bear that in mind. And I think the bead bag is like that. That okay, your beads are precious. They're connecting you with that name. So show care like that. Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's it for now.
Okay. So it's 9:23. Okay, boy, we still got a lot to cover. Maybe we're not gonna get, but let's keep moving. So we've talked about japa now, and maybe we've talked more about japa than a lot of you have heard about it before. Although, but in one sense it was very simple. All that we described was just one very simple idea, is that one bead after another, one bead after the next, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. In the beginning, we may not be we're just zooming through the thing, but as we get deeper into, we should feel more and more. Okay, with each bead, I get the opportunity, the privilege, to once again focus my mind on that mantra and let it ring clear, let it ring like a bell, let it ring with concentration and clear attention and good feeling and sentiment. Let that ring through my consciousness. And if I do that 108 times and then multiply that by different numbers, it becomes a very effective practice. And also it's an intimate practice because it's just me and that name sitting alone, right? But then there's what's called the Yuga Dharma, the sun kirtan, doing kirtan together. The advantage here is that I'm not alone. But there's a momentum of a group of people with the same intention, all focusing together. And there's also the advantage of the music, that the music itself has the almost mystical ability to focus one's concentration, to evoke sentiments. So now, I can get carried by the music. I can get carried by the shared focus of devotion, and really get lifted into deeper levels of concentration on that name. And not just but concentration with feeling. You know, some kirtan is like kind of melancholy, and some kirtan is festive. You get different kinds of kirtan, but it's going to allow my mind to stay deeper, more firmly for longer periods of time, nicely absorbed in that name. And so, really, when I come time to write in this book, I'll list all the different quotes. I don't have them prepared today, but there are many quotes on how this is the dharma for this age. That in the Satya Yuga, it was sitting in meditation like the Ashtanga yogi, because people had much longer lives and much more peaceful lives and much more peaceful minds and much more ability, and they could go deep into meditative states for long periods of time. And in the next yuga, it was what was it? One is sacrifice. One is meditation. What is the other one? Anyways, for some reason, oh, thank you, deity worship. Yes, worship in the temples. One is, I think, the second one is performing elaborate sacrifices, in a devotional mood, but to procure all of the ingredients for that, it's so hard to get qualities. You need gold, and you need this, and you need that, and as a community, people would do that, these big sacrifices. And then in the next yuga, it's worship in the temple. But in this yuga, is this Sankirtan, is this congregational chanting of the name, very potent, powerful yoga practice. So now, if I'm a serious practitioner of Bhakti-yoga, well, then I'm hearing Bhagavatam daily, contemplating it. It's bringing out questions in me, and it's keeping my mind engaged, and it's informing me. It's giving me jnana. It's helping me understand who I am, what this world is, distinguishing between matter and spirit. On the practical level, it's doing all that. But it's also on the level of my sentiment. It's helping refocus my sentiment. So it's not that I'm falling in love with the television character, the movie character, the athlete, or the music star. No, my affection is beginning to go to God and to the devotees of God. I'm falling in love with Vidura. I'm falling in love with Ram. I'm falling in love with Kunti. I'm falling in love with Draupadi. I'm falling in love with Krishna. Because this is who I'm hearing about, and this is how my heart and my mind is being shaped. So that Shravanam is giving me jnana, it's giving me bhakti, it's giving me all that I need to do this practice. And then I'm also bathing my consciousness in that nama chintamani, in that wish fulfilling gem of the holy name, both through this standardized drilling practice, of one again and again and again, bringing my mind, ringing that purity of that mantra through my mind through japa, and cultivating a prayerful relationship with God through that mantra individually. But then I'm also got this very powerful force of Sankirtan, of as a group, riding the waves of that ocean of the holy name through music and with other people, getting deeply absorbed. Now I've got a good strategy for how to restore that mind back to its spiritual consciousness. But let's talk about a few others. What was listed in that image that we showed before was, it said the 5 Panchanga Bhaktis that Rupa Goswami lists: chanting the holy name, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, living in a holy place, worshiping the deity, and associating with devotees. So the things I'm going to discuss now, I want to discuss ritual, and I want to discuss cultural arts, because the others, if you go to the holy place, what's so important is it's full of the cultural arts, and it's full of all the rituals are just going on everywhere. So much of the value of living in the holy place is because there's so much of that culture there that's dominating that place. I mean, we understand that it's on a very esoteric level, it's non-different from the spiritual world. So that very place is composed of spiritual energy. But even just on the more practical level, because everywhere you look, there's a temple, and that temple is full of the ritual, and it's full of the culture of Bhakti Yoga. It's full of the, that spiritual culture that stems out of Bhagavatam and so on. So, but let's I see now I need more time to discuss this. So, let's just go ahead for now and discuss ritual. Um, Now there's something about ritual. So now we've talked about Shravanam, hearing. We've talked about Kirtanam, chanting. Now we're going to talk about ritual, and especially ritual involves deity worship, which is one of the things that we're talking about here. But it involves more than that. It involves etiquette. It involves so many things. But the problem with ritual is generally that people get caught up in the externals of it, and unless they're very conscious about it, they lose the essence of it. Sometimes rituals, the essence almost becomes completely lost, and societies continue to carry out the rituals without any true connection to its purpose. But in the Vedic tradition, the rituals, particularly the rituals that are like there for the rites of passage in life, like a lot of our rituals are around the rites of passage in life, birth rituals, coming of age rituals, marriage rituals, eventually funeral rituals. Every society has their rituals that are related to these rites of passage. But in the Vedic tradition, the name of those rites of passage rituals, and they have many of them, because it's like even like the first time the child eats a grain, the first time the child gets a haircut, like all of these, there's a ritual behind them. But they're called samskaras, right? Samskars. And that's interesting if you think about it, because that's the same word we've used earlier, which means an impression in the mind. So like what we may say, now it's time for the marriage ceremony. Built right into their language is the conception that it's almost like they're saying, now is the time for the marriage mental impression, right? It's like, so it's tying in, it's helping you, reinforce that idea that the reason why we're going through these rituals, and this is key, is the way that they affect our mind, the impressions that they'll leave in our mind, right? That's the whole point. So a tradition, if it's designed well, is designed to leave the most helpful kind of impressions in the mind, right? If I go to a marriage ceremony, I should walk out with those impressions that are going to be most helpful to me for realizing myself, will be kind of reinforced in my mind. If I go to a funeral, same thing, right? Like there's a term, I should really learn this term. I forget what it is, but this term of like, it means like funeral realization, right? Like in others, when you walk away from a funeral, you should walk away with a feeling, with a realization, a little bit more deeply impressed in you about the nature of life itself, right? Someday, maybe not too long down the road, this is going to be my funeral, right? And this body that I'm existing right now will go up in flames, right? This body that I'm identifying with right now is going to go up in flames, but I will go on, and by watching that body burn, that realization is, that impression, that samskar is going in deeper, right? So the prayers that are chanted, the burning of that body, all that's involved in that funeral ritual is leaving a deeper samskara, a deeper impression. Same thing with the marriage. I remember once there's this film I watched. It was kind of like a real independent film about that same place, Varanasi, that I spoke about, where a lot of people like to go there to die, and especially to perform the funeral rites. People come from all over India to perform the funeral rites for their parents there, and then the body is burned there on the bank of the river, and then the ashes are scattered in the Ganges River. And so there, sadhus, yogis go there to watch the bodies, even if it's not their family, right? They go there and they watch the bodies burn to deepen this impression. And so there's this one, I think it was one priest from Varanasi they were interviewing, and he said something like, he said two rhymes, I forget one, but one of them was burning is learning, right? When you watch that body burn, you're supposed to learn this lesson more deep. What was it? Burning is learning, and I forget the other one. But so in any case, when those rituals are done well, when they're especially, one thing I really appreciate is, when I see that when a priest can do a ritual and they can explain it all in such a way that you're understanding everything that you're doing, right? Because especially when they're in another language, like all the prayers and so on are done in a different language. Why are we doing this right now? What kind of impression is meant to be left? Now, sometimes I use the example of the American, or like say the Western wedding as an example of how this works, but I think people have lost touch with it. I have my own idea. I don't know if this is my understanding. It makes sense to me, but like a lot of times there's superstition that's around ritual too, right? Like if you don't do this, then this bad thing happens, right? Or if you do this, something bad happens. And my understanding of that is it's a way of encouraging someone to do it, right? So like, in a wedding, someone's thinking, I remember I had one friend that was he's Indian, and he was getting married, and his mother was just insistent that he wear a turban, and this is the last thing he wanted to do was wear this turban, especially because they have these like kind of like pre-made turbans, that look really corny. And that's what she had. She's like, you got to wear this, and he's like, oh, I don't want to wear that thing, and I told him, actually, I'll wrap, because I dress, the deities of Krishna. I'll wrap you a turban. I could make you a turban and make one better than this one. And I did. He was satisfied with it. But his mother was like, is he wearing it? I said, don't worry. He'll be wearing a turban, But why does he have to wear the turban? In her mind, if he doesn't wear that turban, it's bad, it's a bad omen or something like that. But, so in any case, there's often superstition, around ritual. And within like the Western wedding ritual, there's this one particular one that the groom should not see the bride on the day of the wedding until the moment of the wedding, right? So now one might think, well, why? Why is that? Now here would be with my Vedic understanding of psychology and ritual and all that, this would be what I would propose. Is that what's happening with the bride on the wedding day is she's being elaborately decorated. Often there's a whole crew, of people around her dressing her and doing her hair, and there's the dress, and and that dress itself, right, is the most expensive garment she's ever going to wear in her entire life, commonly. And she's only going to wear it once. Right, that's it. So it's like very special, and so she's got this special dress, and and specially decorated. And in India, they do it very beautifully. She's wearing all kinds of special jewelry that it's too much to wear on any other occasion. It's like, but for this occasion, it's like, oh yeah, she's got the nose ring and the chain and the a big thing around the neck, and there's something up here too, and there's another gold thing going here, and then there's flowers that are sewn into the hair in a special braid, and all of this effort into beautifying her. And if you see that process take place gradually throughout, it doesn't strike you the same way as if you see it when it's all done. You understand? Like, if you're watching it happen, in the end, you don't feel the effect the same way as you do if you just see it when it's done, And so there comes a moment where the groom is there, on the altar next to the priest, and his family's there, and her family, there's an aisle going right down the middle. And he's been waiting for her. And then the celestial music begins, and the doors swing open, and now she's walking down the aisle, and she's walking down looking in a way that he's never seen her before, more beautiful than he's ever seen her before. And I know that when I say all this stuff now, we're getting into like touchy territory about gender roles and things like that. So let's whatever our ideas about, let's just put them aside and just try to understand the nature of the ritual and how I believe it was designed, So the idea being that when she's walking towards him, she's decorated in a way that he's never seen before. and she's radiant. And but she's not alone, right? Who's she with? She's with her father, and she's holding her father's arm, right? And together they're walking down that aisle. And something very clearly is being illustrated in this ritual, that the care of this very precious woman, the focused intention to care for her is being handed from one person to another, right? So the groom there's an impression being made in his mind that she's very beautiful and very precious, sacred, you could say. And the response, and obviously, a sensual man is also thinking, she's so beautiful, and in a sense, now she'll be my wife, and I'll be able to enjoy that beauty. But also the message is very clearly there that along with that comes responsibility to care, right? This man has cared for her from the moment she was born, and taken responsibility for that care to this moment in which the primary caregiver now, the primary protector, is now going to be you. And so all of that is, kind of conveyed through that. And the fact that he hadn't seen her getting dressed, but suddenly she appears in that way, assists the depth of that impression being made in the mind. That's, in any case, that's how I understand it, right? There's this story, I assume it's an Indian thing. I've heard it told in yoga circles about the cat in the basket. I think Raghunath and I may have mentioned this on the show before too. That somehow within this marriage ceremony, there's the idea was, well, you need to have just like they say, right? There's something. What is it that they say in a wedding? Something old, something new, something barred, something blue. Well, somehow they got this idea there has to be the cat in the basket. Okay, everything's set up, but where's the basket and where's the cat? But they say that what happened was, one day that, they're setting up everything and they're doing it. And, in the Vedic way, that where you have the fire, it's all meant to be very pure. You can't have like a cat running across the thing. So there's this cat and it's on the loose and it's running around and every time they put it out, it gets back in. So then someone just, okay, at least for the ceremony, just put the cat in the basket, and then they got the cat in the basket and it can't go anywhere. And so then someone saw that, and then the next people, the next time's come around, say, okay, we got everything and everything's lined up, but where's the cat in the basket? Yeah, someone get the cat in the basket, and then it kind of becomes part of the ritual without people even knowing why it happened. And people are running around, okay, but we can't do the ceremony until we get the cat and we get the basket. No, the basket was just to get the cat out of the way, so these rituals, they can get confused. But when you really understand what the ritual is all about, and when the ritual is really well designed, it can become, again, when it's done with the right devotion and dedication over the course of a long time and without interruption or regularly, it becomes very powerful in its steady influence to reshape or reprogram the mind. And so, wow, I can't believe how fast the time has gone. I would just keep going today, but I got this other teacher training to do, and I'll lose my voice and everything like that. But I'll share one example of how that plays out on the path of bhakti, and that is actually, since I'm here, we can actually see that this is the temple. It's still not complete. We're still working on it, and you're a little far away, but you can see that here's a temple of Radha and Krishna on one side, and on the other side, it's Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Gaur Nitai, another way of worship. And so this is our temple at home, and every day, my wife will sit. There's a table right there, and she sits on that table right in front of them, and we move it over. It's moved over a little bit, and so she has their darshan. She's seeing. Let's just say Radha and Krishna. Actually, I'll describe how this all plays out. But the idea is that within the home, that deity is established. It's not our home; it's their home, right? Because that's where we're cultivating that consciousness, right? That nothing belongs to me; everything is God's energy. I may live in this home, but really it's the home for God, and God is in the center of the home, right? And in this case, particularly Radha and Krishna. And but it's just like, and again, you the more that you understand about Indian culture, which grows out of Bhakti culture, which grows out of Bhagavatam and grows out of Mahabharata and grows out of Ramayana, that within Indian culture, the idea of how a guest is treated is it's a very important part of the culture. And so I'm looking at Paramananda now. I know he knows what it's like to be invited. You're in India and you get invited into someone's home, and the way that you're treated, it's a real depth of hospitality. The way they feed you, the way that like they, like they'll give you the best room in the house, and they'll sleep on the floor. It's like that. And there's a saying that, the guest is as good as God, right? And even that, I think, comes out of Mahabharata. That they have that faith, the guest may be a God coming to me in disguise. The guest, even it said the atiti, the unannounced guest, right? Some unannounced person shows up at the door. They have a deep faith, like how well I treat this person is God's watching that and saying that's how well you treat me. It's something like that. So it really cultivates and instills in one a sense of hospitality, a sense of service, a sense of that I'm the servant, right? And so what this daily temple worship in the home, or puja, you can call it, or archana, what it's really designed to do is to cultivate that sense of service and hospitality. And that one, and actually for Patreon members, they can go back. I did a seminar back when we had that retreat about home worship. And so I speak about this in much more depth there. But the idea that this kind of ritual generally, and this is really what the meaning of the word tantra is all about, is that rather than walk away from the world to find my realization, I engage with the things of this world to find that realization. And so that means I'm gonna treat what would otherwise just be a stone carving. Through ritual, I'm gonna install the presence of God in that form. And then through ritual, I'm gonna worship that form or serve that form with a sense of love and hospitality. And I'm gonna do it with the right devotion, dedication, over a long period of time, and every day. And the ritual is designed in such a way where you can offer 16 things, 64 things. We offer 16 things. That means first a welcoming. Please have a seat. Let me bathe your feet. Let me give you something nice to drink. Let me give you something to refresh your mouth, or some nice drink. Let me give you a bath, some nice clothes, some ornaments, decorations, like whatever, flowers, incense, food, then tambula, like when you eat in an Indian restaurant, they have some spices that you chew after you eat a meal. It's good for digestion, and it kind of cleanses the palate. And then a flower garland. And then the last one is, each item is offered with a mantra, a mula mantra. So, and it's saying, dear Radha and Krishna, please have a seat. Dear Radha and Krishna, please, accept this food. Dear Radha and Krishna, please accept this, incense. But each one is said with a mantra, and then at the very end, what's said is an idam sarvam, like idam asanam, Shrim Klim Radha Krishna Bhyam Namaha. Dear Radha Krishna, please accept this asana, please accept a seat. Just like they were guests that just arrived in your home. And then, but the last one is idam sarvam, Shrim Klim Radha Krishna Bhyam Namaha. Anything that I forgot, anything that you want that I haven't provided, Please accept that. I want to offer that to you. So these 16 things are offered, but even prior to that, there's what's called a Bhuta Shuddhi, where one sits and they consciously, Bhuta Shuddhi, it means like the purification of the self. The idea being like, I tend to identify with my mind, with my body, and the roles that my body plays in this world. Again, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a business person, I'm responsible for this and I'm responsible for that. But I know that all of that is temporary. It's come together for a moment, and in a moment's time, it's all going to separate and fall apart. I know that. But because I live so deeply immersed in it, it gets locked in my consciousness and programmed in my mind that that's who I am. When I do this ritual, I want to consciously erase all that, at least for the time being. I want to set it all aside. And for that, and living in the now, for that moment, I want to exist in my spiritual identity, and with absolutely no connection to the things of this world. And so when someone's taking that puja seriously, it's like, don't talk to me when I'm doing my puja. Leave me, it's like they focus. But going into it, they do this Bhuta Shuddhi. And what my wife does, it's a very simple one. She just chants one verse. And that one verse is, I'm not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. And we talked about this all when we're talking about karma yoga, right? I'm not brahmachari, I'm not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. All of these social roles, none of them are me. Who am I? Gopi Bhartar Kamala Yordasa Dasa Anudasa. I'm simply the servant of the servant of the servant of Sri Krishna, the lover of the gopis. That's my eternal identity. And so I'm going to forget everything else, at least for this 20 minutes every day. If for 20 minutes every day I can just live deep in the consciousness that I'm not any of these other things, I'm not even going to think about those things. I'm Krishna's servant, and Radha and Krishna have come into my home, and I'm going to offer them with love anything nice I can offer them. And it's going to involve fragrant oils, and it's going to involve fragrant incense, and it's going to involve looking at their forms. I wish I could get a little closer for you. But you can see like the paintings that I have are really beautifully done by this artist named Vrindavan Das. But Radha and Krishna, they're on the bank of the Yamuna River, and surrounded by kadamba, in a grove of kadamba trees with birds all around, and that's you see, actually the way the meditation goes is, she doesn't offer these 16 things only to Radha and Krishna. First, she does the Bhuta Shuddhi. And then she sips, she takes water and through mantra transforms ordinary water into the holy rivers, right? Then she drinks that water to purify her body with it. Then she does the Bhuta Shuddhi, that I'm not any of these roles, And this is all after bathing and coming in clean and pure, So you bathe your body, you walk in feeling refreshed. You place the tilak on the marking of Lord Vishnu on your body. You sit, you chant the mantras to call the holy rivers into the water. Then you sip the holy rivers and you purify your body with that. So now externally my body is marked in this way. Internally I've got the holy water flowing in my system, right? Then the meditation, I'm not any of these things. I'm simply the servant of Krishna, the lover of the gopis. Then I offer these 16 things to my guru, because it's by the grace of my guru that I have this. Without my gurus, it's not like I even have the role like I'm Krishna's number one over here, right? Any access that I have is through the grace of my guru. So first I offer these 16, I offer the same hospitality to my guru, right? And that's preceded by prayers, Om Jnana Timirandasya, and it's followed by prayers, right? Then I worship Sri Chaitanya, right? Who is Krishna himself in this very special and merciful form. And I chant prayers to glorify him, meditating on the description of his form is within those prayers. So it brings my mind to the description of his form. My eyes are focused on his form, nicely decorated. And then I offer him the 16 items, and then more prayers for him, another beautiful verse. And they're all sung, and they all have beautiful melodies. And then the next prayer for Krishna, it describes that, it describes Vrindavan, that Vrindavan is this beautiful forest, and there are trees and there are birds and the breezes are all refreshing. And within that grove, there's a beautiful tree. And at the base of that tree, there's a beautiful throne. And sitting on that throne is Radha and Krishna. So then you meditate on Vrindavan, the setting, you meditate on their forms, sitting there, and now you offer the 16 items, right? And then when the 16 items are offered, then more prayers to glorify Radha and Krishna. And then 10 prayers, almost always at the end of this kind of ritual, you pray for forgiveness for anything that you haven't done well or anything you haven't done right. Just like if some very special guest came, I cooked for you, I hope it was okay. If it wasn't, please forgive me because I just want you to be fully satisfied. I hope the bed was okay. Was it bumpy? Was it lumpy? I hope not. I hope it was just right. It's like that. But the prayers that she chants, they're very beautiful prayers that just go, they're just really nice. And it's 10 verses. And the mood in them is very beautiful. And one of my favorites is this verse by Rupa Goswami that's just as young boys' minds are attracted to young girls, and just as the minds of young girls are naturally attracted to young boys, may my mind always be attracted to you. It's verses like that. And then dear Radha, the last two ones are verses to Radharani. You're an ocean of mercy. You're a flowing river of grace. Please accept me as your servant. That's my only prayer. It's like that. So you do this whole thing. It takes 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes of just beautiful prayers sung to beautiful melodies, invoking beautiful visions, accompanied with offerings as part of the ritual. And so the point is you do this, and then you walk away from the thing, and you smell like flowers, and you smell like fragrant oils, and you feel refreshed and good. You've brought your mind, it's a relief. It's purifying, it's uplifting, it's aesthetically, it's very pleasing. And this way, by doing this with the right devotion over the course of a long time, without interruption, the mind becomes accustomed to, rather than aversion to becoming the servant, attraction to becoming the servant, right? And associating the beautiful fragrances and the beautiful visions, etc., with beauty itself. Like, this is where I go to find my beauty. We read earlier, what was it that due to false impressions of the mind, we've lost touch with the self, and now we're searching for happiness through externals. Now we're seeing my beauty and happiness, they lie within service. That's where I find beauty. That's where I find happiness. And so in this way, as we've been saying all along, we overcome the obstacle of the mind. We consciously curate what the mind is going to be absorbed in. We consciously bring in the visions, the sounds, the sights, the smells, the touch, the tactile sense that we want. And when you do, if you've ever ground, offering ground sandalwood paste is generally, part of the puja. And I don't know if any of you have ever done this. You have a stone and you have a piece of that wood, and that wood is so fragrant. It's got such a sublime, how does this wood get invested with the most beautiful fragrance? And you put a little bit of water on the stone, and then you grind that wood, and this fragrant paste comes out of it. And then when you walk away, that paste is all over your hands, and it's just such a beautiful smell. And it's just reprogramming that mind. It's not just mere sentiment, but for the Bhakti yogis, our faith is that, no, this is reality. This is the real world that I'm in now, and for these 20 minutes, I'm going to live in that real world. And because my Bhakti yoga falls under the broader umbrella of karma yoga, I still, when the puja is over, I'm going to have my responsibilities. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to, take care of my family. I'm going to do whatever I have to do. But I walk away being changed by that even though I'm doing this external life, that internal life is always alive in me, right? And that'll become deeper and stronger and stronger and stronger as I become more advanced in Bhakti Yoga. So we spoke a little bit about Shravanam, we spoke a little bit about Kirtanam, and we spoke about ritual. When we come back next week, We're going to talk about the cultural arts. We'll talk about seva. And then we'll move on to understanding how, although all, and this will be a real important part, how all four of these paths are valid, that they culminate in bhakti. Okay, that they culminate in bhakti. That bhakti is direct, and that all four paths, if you read Bhagavad Gita, it's clear. They culminate in bhakti. Because bhakti is the nature of the self. Right? Devotion to God is the nature of the self. So the other paths are valid in moving towards self-realization. But the deepest level of self-realization is ultimately my loving connection with God, and that's ultimately found in bhakti. So Ashtanga Yoga can prepare me to get there. Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, can prepare me to get there. Bhakti Yoga means I'm just working there right from the beginning. And so we'll discuss that, and we'll also discuss Karma, Jnana, and Bhakti. That I really am looking forward to that conversation, because I think that's it gives one perspective to understand spirituality in general in a very clear construct. So we didn't cover all Bhakti Yoga today, but we'll finish that, and then we'll move on. And I'm looking forward to the conversations going forward, because they get, in my mind, they get real exciting. Thank you all so much. That 2 hours felt like 20 minutes to me. I hope it didn't drag on for you in any way. Again, if anyone would like to leave a donation, they would be kindly accepted at PayPal, bhakticollective@gmail.com. Mara, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Prabhu.
And thank you, everybody, I'm saving the chat. Got it. We, unfortunately, although I said on the show that we would do this tomorrow morning, we won't, because I have to go right from that straight. Just like if I had to go right now into another 3.5 hours, I wouldn't make it out the other end probably. So I can't do that tomorrow. But we'll come back. Let's find out. We'll announce when the next thing. I'd imagine it will be in the afternoon. We got to figure it out, because I got all these other teacher trainings coming up. But we'll get back to you. I'd imagine they're going to be on the weekends, but I'm not positive of that. So as soon as possible, I'll figure that out and get the news out to you. Thank you all so much. Hari Om Tat Sat. Have a great weekend, everybody.